Imagine being in the midst of World War II, where death and destruction ruled every battlefield. Now imagine something even more unbelievable. A 500-pound brown bear carrying ammunition boxes through enemy fire, drinking beer with Polish soldiers, and eventually becoming an official member of the Allied forces. This isn't fiction. This is the extraordinary true story of Wojtek, the only bear ever to be formally enlisted in the military with his own rank and serial number. But how did a wild Syrian bear end up fighting Nazis alongside human soldiers? And why was this remarkable story almost erased from history books? The year was 1942, and the world was engulfed in the flames of the Second World War. While American forces were battling in the Pacific after Pearl Harbor, thousands of miles away in the frozen wastelands of Siberia, a different kind of struggle was unfolding. Stalin had released thousands of Polish prisoners from Soviet labor camps after Hitler broke the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact by invading Russia. These emaciated, half-dead Polish soldiers were now being assembled into a new fighting force, the Polish II Corps, to join the Allied war effort. Among these men was a young artillery supply soldier named Piotr Prędycz, whose life was about to change forever through an encounter that would seem too fantastical for even the most creative Hollywood screenwriter. The Polish II Corps began a grueling journey that would eventually take them through Persia, modern-day Iran, Iraq, Palestine, Egypt, and finally to the bloody battlefields of Italy. These men had already endured unimaginable suffering in the Soviet gulags, where temperatures dropped to -40 degrees, and prisoners worked until they collapsed from exhaustion or starvation. They had witnessed their comrades die by the thousands, bodies stacked like firewood in the Siberian snow. For these soldiers, death had become more familiar than life, and trust was a luxury they could no longer afford. The Middle East in 1942 was a maze of shifting allegiances and strategic importance. As Hitler's Afrika Korps, under General Rommel, threatened Egypt and the Suez Canal, Allied forces scrambled to secure supply lines and reinforcements. The region was a patchwork of British mandates, independent kingdoms, and territories with complex tribal and religious dynamics. For the Polish soldiers trudging through this foreign landscape, it was yet another strange chapter in their odyssey of displacement. Having lost their homeland to both Nazi and Soviet occupation, these men were fighting for a country that effectively no longer existed. What happened next near the small Iranian town of Hamadan would seem like a hallucination to anyone who wasn't there to witness it. A small Polish boy, one of many orphaned refugees traveling with the soldiers, made a discovery that would transform morale and create a legend that would endure for decades after the war's end. It was in this unlikely setting, amid the chaos of humanity's darkest hour, that a most unusual friendship would form between desperate men far from home and a creature who would become not just their mascot, but their brother in arms. The story of Wojtek, the bear who became a soldier, was about to begin. The encounter that would become military legend occurred when a local boy approached the Polish soldiers with a burlap sack containing something that moved and whimpered. Inside was a scrawny, malnourished brown bear cub, no more than a few months old. The boy explained that hunters had killed the mother bear, leaving the cub orphaned and destined for certain death in the wild. Whether motivated by compassion or curiosity, artillery supply soldier Piotr Prędycz traded a few chocolate bars, a can of beef, and a Swiss Army knife for the bear cub. A transaction that would alter not just his war experience, but military history itself. The soldiers, many of whom had lost their entire families to war and Soviet deportations, immediately formed a bond with the helpless creature who, like them, had been violently separated from everything familiar. The Polish II Corps, commanded by General Władysław Anders, was an army of ghosts, men who had survived Soviet labor camps where the mortality rate exceeded 50%. Before their imprisonment, most had been ordinary civilians, teachers, farmers, factory workers, and students. Piotr had been a 22-year-old university student in Warsaw when Germany and the Soviet Union divided Poland between them in 1939. Arrested by Soviet forces for anti-revolutionary activities, he had been caught with a Polish flag. He was sent to Kolyma, one of the most deadly camps in Stalin's Gulag system. When offered the chance to join the newly formed Polish army, he and thousands like him seized the opportunity, even if it meant more fighting and potential death. At least, they reasoned, they would die as free men rather than as prisoners. The bear cub, whom they named Wojtek, pronounced Wojtek, meaning smiling warrior or happy soldier in Polish, quickly became more than a pet. In those early days, the soldiers fed him condensed milk from an empty vodka bottle with a rag as a nipple. As the bear grew, he developed a taste for fruits, marmalade, syrup and honey, but also for beer, which became his favorite treat. More remarkably, he enjoyed smoking, or rather eating cigarettes, and wrestling with the soldiers, who were careful to remove his claws from the equation by covering them with woolen socks. Wojtek slept alongside the men, often cuddling with them for warmth on cold desert nights, and began to mimic their behaviors, saluting when greeted and standing upright on his hind legs when addressed. As the Polish II Corps moved through Iraq and into Palestine, Wojtek grew from a cuddly cub into a 6-foot-tall, 500-pound adult Syrian brown bear. His presence became a logistical challenge as well as a morale booster. The soldiers constructed a wooden cage mounted on a truck to transport him, though he was often allowed to roam freely around camp, never once attacking anyone or attempting to escape. He learned to shower when he saw others doing so, developed a fondness for wrestling, always allowing his human opponents to win, and was taught to carry heavy artillery shells, a skill that would later prove surprisingly useful. For men who had endured starvation, torture, and the destruction of their nation, caring for Wojtek provided a rare opportunity for tenderness and normalcy amid the insanity of war. By 1943, as the Allied forces prepared for operations in the Italian campaign, a problem arose that threatened to separate Wojtek from his adopted family. The Polish II Corps received orders to deploy to Italy to join the British 8th Army in the push against German forces. Military regulations strictly prohibited mascot animals on Navy transport ships headed to active combat zones. The solution the Polish soldiers devised was as ingenious as it was unprecedented. They officially enlisted Wojtek into the 22nd Transport Company, 2nd Polish Corps Artillery Supply, as a private, complete with his own paybook, rank, and serial number. The paperwork was processed and military bureaucracy was satisfied. On official documents, Private Wojtek was now a soldier of the Allied forces, ready to face the Nazi war machine on the Italian front. As 1943 dawned, the Polish soldiers and their bear companion faced a logistical crisis that threatened to separate them forever. The 22nd Artillery Supply Company received orders to board a British naval vessel bound for Naples, Italy, where they would join the Allied Italian campaign. When they arrived at the port in Alexandria, Egypt, military regulations created an unexpected obstacle. The British High Command strictly forbade mascot animals aboard transport ships heading to combat zones. The Polish soldiers, many of whom had survived the Soviet gulags only to face the horrors of war, refused to abandon Wojtek. An ingenious solution emerged, officially enlisting Wojtek into the Polish army as a private soldier. With a service number, paybook, rank and official papers, Wojtek was no longer a mascot bear, but rather Private Wojtek, a legitimate member of the Polish II Corps headed for the battlefields of Italy. This creative circumvention of military bureaucracy allowed the soldiers to keep their beloved companion and would ultimately lead to one of the most extraordinary chapters of World War II. The Italian campaign of 1944 presented the Allies with some of the war's most brutal fighting. The Gustav Line, a series of German fortifications across central Italy, blocked the Allied advance toward Rome. At its heart stood Monte Cassino, a 1700-year-old Benedictine abbey, transformed into an impregnable fortress by elite German paratroopers. The position commanded views of the entire valley, making any approach by Allied forces a deadly proposition. Previous assaults by American, British, Indian, and New Zealand troops had failed with catastrophic casualties. In February 1944, after 3 unsuccessful attempts to take the mountain, the Polish II Corps was ordered to make a 4th attack. The men of the 22nd Artillery Supply Company, including their bear comrade, prepared to face what many military historians consider among the most challenging and bloody battles of the European theater. By this time, Wojtek had grown from a small cub into a 500-pound adult bear standing over 6 feet tall on his hind legs. Despite his imposing size, he remained gentle with his human companions, sleeping in their tents, drinking beer with them, and even smoking cigarettes, though he actually ate them rather than smoking them. The soldiers had taught him to salute when greeted, and he understood several commands in Polish and English. His size and strength had become legendary within the unit, as he could effortlessly carry heavy loads that would require multiple men. This unusual ability would soon prove crucial during one of the war's defining battles, as Monte Cassino loomed before the Polish corps like a death sentence. On May 11, 1944, after months of preparation, the fourth battle for Monte Cassino began with a massive artillery barrage. The Polish II Corps launched their attack against heavily fortified German positions on Phantom Ridge and Hills 593 and 569. The battle quickly descended into nightmarish close-quarter combat among the rocks and ruins. German artillery pounded Polish supply lines, creating a critical need for ammunition at forward positions. It was during this chaos, with shells exploding and bullets flying, that Wojtek performed the act that would immortalize him in military history. Without being commanded, the bear observed his comrades struggling to move heavy crates of 25-pound artillery shells to the forward guns, and he began to help. Witnesses reported an extraordinary sight amid the hellish landscape of Monte Cassino: a massive bear, walking upright on his hind legs through artillery fire, carrying 100-pound ammunition crates that normally required 4 men to lift. Unperturbed by the deafening explosions and seemingly oblivious to danger, Wojtek methodically transported shell after shell to the Polish artillery positions. Not once did he drop a crate. His actions helped maintain the supply of ammunition during critical moments of the battle, directly contributing to the Polish Corps' eventual success in capturing Monte Cassino on May 18, 1944. The German forces, who had repelled 3 previous Allied assaults, could hardly believe the reports of a bear helping to defeat them. For his extraordinary service, Wojtek was promoted to the rank of corporal, and the 22nd Company adopted a new official emblem, a bear carrying an artillery shell. The fall of Monte Cassino marked a turning point in the Italian campaign, opening the road to Rome for Allied forces. For the men of the 22nd Artillery Supply Company and their now famous bear comrade, Corporal Wojtek, it represented their greatest triumph after years of suffering and displacement. The victory was bittersweet, however, as the Polish II Corps had paid a terrible price, over 4,000 casualties, including nearly 1,000 dead. These men had fought not only for Allied victory, but for the freedom of their homeland, a freedom that would ultimately be denied them. As news of Wojtek's exploits spread throughout Allied forces, he became a symbol of Polish courage and determination. High-ranking officers and war correspondents sought him out, and the bear who had carried ammunition through enemy fire became a living legend. The 22nd Company's new emblem, a bear carrying an artillery shell, appeared on vehicles, uniforms, and equipment, a proud acknowledgement of their unusual comrades' contribution to one of the war's most difficult battles. Following Monte Cassino, the Polish II Corps continued its advance north through Italy, participating in operations to capture Ancona and break the Gothic line. Throughout these campaigns, Wojtek remained with his unit, continuing to boost morale among troops exhausted by the grinding advance against determined German resistance. In combat zones, he stayed in his wooden transportation crate or in specially dug pits near command posts, but during rest periods he enjoyed remarkable freedom. The bear's fame had spread to such an extent that he received special privileges no other soldier enjoyed. In the summer heat of Italy, he developed a passion for swimming, occasionally startling other Allied soldiers who encountered a massive bear splashing in streams or the Adriatic Sea. He also maintained his fondness for wrestling with his Polish comrades, a spectacle that both bewildered and amused other Allied troops who witnessed these good-natured contests between man and bear. As the European war ground toward its conclusion in 1945, the men of the Polish II Corps faced an uncertain future. The Yalta Conference had effectively ceded control of Poland to the Soviet Union, placing the country firmly behind what would soon be called the Iron Curtain. For soldiers who had been imprisoned in Soviet gulags and had fought their way across 3 continents to help defeat Nazi Germany, The prospect of returning to a Soviet-dominated Poland was unthinkable. Many, including most of the 22nd Company, chose exile rather than return to their homeland. When the war in Europe ended in May 1945, the Polish II Corps was transported to Great Britain, where they would await decisions about their future. Wojtek accompanied them, crossing Europe one final time to reach the shores of Scotland, where the 22nd Company was stationed at Winfield Airfield near the village of Hutton in Berwickshire. In Scotland, Wojtek's legend grew as local residents became enamored with the soldier bear. Children in particular were drawn to the gentle giant, who accepted their attention with characteristic good humor. Polish soldiers would bring him to community dances and gatherings, where he would sit upright in the back of transport trucks, waving to onlookers. For a time, it seemed that Wojtek might live out his days in this peaceful setting, surrounded by the men who had become his family. However, as the Polish armed forces were gradually demobilized between 1946 and 1947, the question of what would become of Wojtek grew more pressing. A bear, even one with an illustrious military record, could not live independently in the Scottish countryside, nor could individual soldiers, many now seeking work and new lives as refugees, care for such a large animal. On November 15, 1947, a somber ceremony marked the end of Wojtek's military career. The 22nd Company, which had found him as a cub in the mountains of Iran and had been his family through the horrors of war, formally handed him over to the Edinburgh Zoo. Many of the soldiers wept openly as they said goodbye to their comrade. Wojtek entered his new enclosure wearing his service medals, an honorary corporal in the Polish army now retired from active duty. The bear, who had traversed continents and survived one of history's most destructive conflicts, would spend his remaining years as a living reminder of Poland's contribution to the Allied victory and of the unique bond that can form between humans and animals even amid the chaos of war. For the Polish soldiers now scattered across the world, leaving Wojtek behind was like losing the last living connection to the homeland they had fought for but could not return to. Life at Edinburgh Zoo brought dramatic changes for the bear, who had once roamed freely among soldiers and carried ammunition through battlefields. Wojtek was initially placed in a spacious enclosure, but nothing could replicate the camaraderie and stimulation he had experienced during his military service. In the early days of his captivity, Wojtek would perk up and become animated whenever he heard Polish being spoken by visitors, often standing on his hind legs and making saluting gestures that delighted onlookers but hinted at a deeper recognition and longing. Former soldiers from the 22nd Company, many of whom had settled in Scotland after the war, made regular pilgrimages to visit their old comrade, bringing him cigarettes, which he continued to eat rather than smoke, and occasional treats of beer. These visits provided brief moments of joy for Wojtek, but zoo staff reported that he would become noticeably depressed after his old friends departed, sometimes refusing food for days and pacing his enclosure restlessly. As the years passed, Wojtek became one of Edinburgh Zoo's most popular attractions, drawing visitors who had heard the incredible story of the soldier bear. He appeared on BBC Television's children's programme Blue Peter and was featured in numerous newspaper articles throughout Britain and Poland. Zoo visitors would often try to get his attention by shouting Polish phrases or throwing cigarettes into his enclosure, mimicking what they had heard about his wartime habits. Wojtek's fame ensured that the contribution of Polish forces to the Allied victory remained in public consciousness even as the Cold War deepened the division between East and West. However, for Wojtek himself, fame was poor compensation for the loss of his military family. As he aged, he became increasingly withdrawn, less responsive even to Polish speakers, and would often sit with his back to visitors, staring at the wall of his enclosure for hours. While Wojtek lived out his days in Edinburgh, his former comrades faced the challenges of building new lives in exile. The Polish Resettlement Act of 1947 allowed Polish veterans to settle permanently in Britain, but they faced significant obstacles, including language barriers, discrimination, and the psychological trauma of knowing their homeland was now under Soviet domination. Many took manual labor jobs far below their pre-war professional qualifications. Some maintained their military camaraderie by forming Polish ex-servicemen's clubs and cultural associations, but all carried the dual burden of being both war heroes and refugees unable to return home. For these men, Wojtek represented not just a beloved mascot, but a living symbol of their sacrificed homeland, a fellow exile who, like them, had given everything for Poland's freedom only to end up stranded in a foreign land. In Poland itself, the communist regime that took power after the war deliberately suppressed stories about the Polish armed forces in the West, viewing them as politically dangerous reminders of an independent Poland. Wojtek's story, along with the broader history of the Polish II Corps, was effectively erased from official historical accounts. Children grew up learning a Soviet-approved version of World War II that minimized the Western Allies' contributions and ignored the fate of those Poles who had escaped Soviet control. Only in hushed conversations at home did some families preserve the memory of Anders' army and their bear companion. This erasure of history would persist until the collapse of communist rule in 1989, by which time Wojtek had long since passed away, his remarkable story unknown to generations of Poles in the country he and his comrades had fought for. Wojtek's health began to decline in the early 1960s, with arthritis limiting his mobility and age diminishing his once impressive stature. On December 2, 1963, at the age of 21, Corporal Wojtek died at Edinburgh Zoo. News of his passing prompted an outpouring of grief from Polish veterans across Britain, many of whom attended a memorial service held at the zoo. British newspapers carried obituaries that recounted his wartime exploits, and the Polish-language press in exile published lengthy tributes. In death as in life, Wojtek remained a potent symbol of unlikely heroism, of the unbreakable bonds formed in war, and of the displaced Polish nation whose soldiers had adopted an orphaned bear cub and made him one of their own. In a final poignant footnote, when zoo officials cleaned out Wojtek's enclosure, they found a small worn photograph tucked into a corner, a group picture of the men of the 22nd Company taken in Italy after Monte Cassino, with a young Wojtek sitting proudly among them. For decades after Wojtek's death, his story remained largely forgotten outside the circle of Polish veterans and their families. Throughout the Cold War, as Poland remained behind the Iron Curtain, official histories on both sides of the divide overlooked the tale of the soldier bear. In the West, World War II narratives focused primarily on American, British, and Soviet contributions to victory, while in communist Poland, stories that celebrated the Western-aligned Polish forces were actively suppressed. This historical amnesia began to lift in the 1980s and 90s as researchers and journalists started piecing together Wojtek's remarkable journey. When the Polish author Wiesław Antoni Lasocki published Wojtek spod Monte Cassino in 1986, he had to rely heavily on interviews with aging veterans scattered across the world. Their memories, though heartfelt, sometimes contradicted each other on specific details, creating challenges for historians attempting to separate fact from the embellishments that inevitably attach to legendary tales. Despite these difficulties, a clearer picture of Wojtek's life emerged, one that was, if anything, more extraordinary than the folklore suggested. Among the most revealing discoveries were military documents that confirmed Wojtek's official enlistment in the Polish army. His service record, complete with rank, serial number, and pay allotments, provided irrefutable evidence that the bear had been more than just a mascot. Equally significant were battlefield reports from Monte Cassino that matter-of-factly mentioned the bear's assistance in moving ammunition, treating his contribution as simply another aspect of the battle rather than as something extraordinary. This casual documentation lent credibility to veterans' claims about Wojtek's role. Photographs also emerged showing Wojtek in various settings, playfully wrestling with soldiers, riding in transport trucks, and standing upright next to his human comrades. The most iconic image, showing him handling an artillery shell, became the basis for memorials that would later be erected in his honor. Together, these primary sources validated a story so unusual that it might otherwise have been dismissed as a wartime exaggeration. The fall of communism in Poland in 1989 removed the political barriers to commemorating Wojtek and the Polish II Corps. As Poland reclaimed its full national history, the story of Anders' army and their bear companion became a source of pride and fascination. Books, documentaries, and articles proliferated, and Wojtek was reintroduced to a Polish public that had been largely unaware of his existence. Schools began teaching his story as part of World War II history, and his image appeared on everything from postage stamps to tourist souvenirs. This rediscovery coincided with a broader reassessment of Poland's wartime experience and the recognition of sacrifices made by Poles fighting on all fronts. For a nation reclaiming its historical narrative after decades of imposed Soviet interpretations, Wojtek represented something uniquely Polish: resilience, resourcefulness, and the ability to find humanity and even joy amid unspeakable suffering. The international revival of Wojtek's story gained momentum in the early 2000s, propelled by the publication of several well-researched books in English. Aileen Orr's Wojtek the Bear, Polish War Hero, and Gary Paulin's Wojtek the Warrior Bear introduced the remarkable tale to new audiences across the globe. Children's books, plays, and eventually documentary films followed, each adding to Wojtek's posthumous fame. As his story spread, it resonated with diverse audiences. Military history buffs appreciated the bear's unique contribution to a pivotal battle. Animal lovers were moved by the bond between the soldiers and their unusual companion. And the children and grandchildren of Polish veterans embraced Wojtek as a tangible connection to their family history. The internet age further accelerated this rediscovery, with websites, social media groups, and online forums dedicated to sharing information about the soldier bear, helping connect researchers and descendants of veterans who might otherwise never have found each other. These efforts to preserve Wojtek's memory culminated in a series of memorial statues erected in cities with connections to his story. The first major monument, unveiled in 2014 in Krakow's Jordan Park, depicts Wojtek walking alongside a Polish soldier. A year later, an even more impressive statue was dedicated in Edinburgh's Princes Street Gardens, featuring the bear with his soldier companion, and incorporating a relief map showing Wojtek's extraordinary journey from Iran to Scotland. Additional monuments followed in Cassino, Italy, where Wojtek had his moment of battlefield glory, and in Sopot, Poland. Each unveiling attracted surviving veterans, dignitaries, and hundreds of ordinary citizens drawn by the compelling narrative of the bear soldier. These bronze tributes ensure that even as the last veterans of World War II pass away, the remarkable story of Corporal Wojtek will endure as a testament to an unusual friendship forged in humanity's darkest hour. In death, as in life, Wojtek continues to unite people across national boundaries, a fitting legacy for a bear who knew nothing of the human divisions that cause wars, but everything about the bonds that help humans survive them. What makes Wojtek's story so enduring is not just its uniqueness, but the multiple layers of significance it carries. On its surface, it's an engaging animal tale, the kind that naturally captivates public imagination. Yet beneath this appealing veneer lies a profound narrative about the human experience of war. The Polish soldiers who adopted Wojtek had endured sequential traumas: the loss of their country, imprisonment in Soviet gulags where thousands died from cold and starvation, and the subsequent realization that they were fighting for a homeland they might never see again. In this context, Wojtek represented something beyond mere mascot or pet. He became a surrogate for the normal family connections these men had lost. The bear's presence allowed battle-hardened soldiers to express gentleness and nurturing instincts that combat typically suppresses. Photographs show tough veterans smiling like children as they played with their unusual comrade, momentarily escaping the horrors surrounding them. This psychological dimension explains why the soldiers risked military discipline to keep Wojtek with them. He wasn't just entertainment, but a crucial emotional anchor in a world turned upside down. Wojtek's story also illuminates a frequently overlooked aspect of World War II, the multinational character of the Allied effort and the particular contribution of Polish forces. After their country's defeat in 1939, Polish soldiers continued fighting on virtually every front of the war. The pilots of the Polish 303 Squadron became the highest-scoring unit in the Battle of Britain. Polish codebreakers had made crucial early breakthroughs in deciphering the German Enigma machine before sharing their findings with British intelligence. And at Monte Cassino, It was Polish troops who finally succeeded, where American, British and Indian forces had failed. Yet despite these contributions, Poland ended the war not as a victorious ally, but as a nation effectively handed over to Soviet control. The fate of Wojtek, celebrated briefly then largely forgotten for decades, mirrors the broader experience of Polish forces who, despite their sacrifice, found themselves on the wrong side of Cold War geopolitics, their contributions minimized in both Eastern and Western historical accounts. Perhaps most compelling is how Wojtek's story transcends the often dehumanizing narratives of World War II. In a conflict remembered for unprecedented cruelty and industrial-scale killing, the tale of soldiers adopting a bear cub stands out as a reminder of persistent humanity. Even as these men engaged in the grim business of war, they maintained the capacity for compassion, playfulness and connection, with a creature utterly removed from their military objectives. This aspect resonates powerfully in our current era, when war footage from around the globe shows the continuing capacity for human brutality. Wojtek's story suggests that even amid history's darkest chapters, people can preserve their fundamental humanity, a message that gives his tale relevance beyond mere historical curiosity. The fact that these soldiers, themselves victims of immense suffering, chose to share their limited rations and provide care for an orphaned bear speaks volumes about the resilience of the human spirit. The story of Wojtek also serves as a powerful teaching tool, introducing young people to complex historical events through an accessible narrative. For children learning about World War II, the tale of a bear carrying ammunition through a battlefield provides an entry point to understanding the broader conflict. Teachers report that students who might otherwise struggle to connect with distant historical events become engaged when presented with Wojtek's journey. This educational value explains the proliferation of children's books about Wojtek in recent years, with titles published in multiple languages and used in schools across Europe and North America. These books typically balance the more entertaining aspects of the bear's story with age-appropriate introductions to the serious historical context. Through Wojtek, young readers learn not just about a remarkable animal, but about concepts like displacement, exile, sacrifice, and the complicated aftermath of the war when victory for the Allies didn't translate into freedom for all nations. The enduring fascination with Wojtek also reflects our complex relationship with animals in wartime. Throughout history, various creatures have served alongside human forces, from war horses and carrier pigeons to modern military working dogs. These animals have demonstrated remarkable capabilities, often performing tasks that saved human lives, yet they had no concept of the conflicts they were participating in and no choice in their involvement. Wojtek's case is particularly poignant because, unlike trained military animals, he was not deliberately prepared for war service. His carrying of ammunition at Monte Cassino was a spontaneous mimicking of human behavior, not the result of training. This raises thought-provoking questions about animal cognition, bonding, and the ethics of animal involvement in human conflicts. Wojtek was, in many ways, both a participant in and a victim of World War II. Orphaned by hunting, adopted by soldiers out of compassion, but ultimately separated from his adopted family and confined to a zoo because of geopolitical circumstances beyond anyone's control. The day Wojtek carried ammunition at Monte Cassino remains the defining moment of his remarkable life story, and eyewitness accounts provide a vivid picture of this extraordinary event. The battle had reached a critical phase, with Polish artillery bombarding German positions to support infantry advances up the treacherous slopes. Ammunition supplies were running dangerously low at forward gun positions, but the rugged terrain and enemy fire made resupply extremely hazardous. The men of the 22nd Artillery Supply Company were struggling to move heavy crates of shells from trucks to the guns, a task normally requiring 4 soldiers per box. According to multiple veterans' testimonies, Wojtek had been watching this activity from his position near the supply trucks when, without any command or training, he approached a stack of ammunition crates. What happened next stunned even the soldiers who had lived alongside the bear for years. Standing on his hind legs, Wojtek carefully lifted a crate containing 4 25-pound artillery shells, a load weighing approximately 100 pounds, and followed the supply route to the gun positions. Corporal Peter Prendis, who witnessed this scene, later recalled, "We couldn't believe our eyes. Here was this bear walking upright like a man, carrying ammunition that would take several of us to lift." German shells were falling nearby, but Wojtek seemed completely unfazed, as though he understood the importance of what he was doing. Even more remarkably, Wojtek continued this activity throughout the day, making multiple trips between the supply trucks and the artillery positions. He never dropped a single crate despite the difficult terrain and the chaos of battle surrounding him. News of the bear's actions quickly spread among Polish forces, boosting morale at a crucial moment in the battle. For soldiers who had endured years of hardship, the sight of their beloved bear voluntarily joining their struggle against the German forces seemed almost mystical, a sign that perhaps their sacrifices would not be in vain. Whether Wojtek truly comprehended the significance of his actions is impossible to know, but the practical effect was undeniable. The Polish guns remained supplied with ammunition during a pivotal phase of the battle. The military impact of Wojtek's assistance, while difficult to quantify precisely, was significant enough that his actions were reported up the chain of command and eventually reached Allied headquarters. General Władysław Anders, commander of the Polish II Corps, was initially skeptical of reports about a bear carrying ammunition until multiple officers confirmed the account. In recognition of Wojtek's service, Anders approved his promotion from private to corporal, an unprecedented honor for a non-human. More tangibly, the 22nd Company received official permission to change their unit insignia to a design depicting a bear carrying an artillery shell, a badge the veterans would wear with pride for the rest of their lives. When Monte Cassino finally fell to Allied forces after a week of brutal fighting, Wojtek's contribution became part of the lore surrounding this crucial victory, which opened the road to Rome and marked a turning point in the Italian campaign. For the Polish soldiers, many of whom had traveled thousands of miles from Soviet captivity to reach this battlefield, the triumph at Cassino represented their greatest moment of the war, and Wojtek had shared in achieving it. The question of what motivated Wojtek's actions at Monte Cassino has fascinated historians, animal behaviorists, and psychologists. The most straightforward explanation is that the bear was displaying learned behavior through observation and imitation. Having watched the soldiers repeatedly carry crates from trucks to gun positions, Wojtek simply mimicked what he had seen, much as he had learned to salute, drink from bottles, and perform other human-like actions. Yet this explanation doesn't fully account for why he chose that particular moment to begin carrying ammunition, nor does it explain his apparent indifference to the explosions and gunfire around him. Some veterans maintained that Wojtek somehow understood the gravity of the situation and was intentionally helping his human companions in their time of need. While modern animal behavior experts would caution against such anthropomorphic interpretations, they would also acknowledge that bears are highly intelligent creatures capable of complex learning and strong bonds with human caregivers. Whatever the scientific explanation, for the men who witnessed it, Wojtek's actions that day transcended simple animal behavior and entered the realm of the legendary. The legacy of Wojtek's battlefield service extends beyond historical curiosity to raise profound questions about the cognitive and emotional capacities of non-human animals. If a Syrian brown bear could recognize a critical situation and act in ways that assisted his human companions, navigating dangerous terrain while carrying heavy loads, what does this suggest about animal intelligence and the depth of human-animal bonds? Modern research has revealed that many species, particularly large-brained mammals like bears, possess far greater cognitive abilities and emotional complexity than previously recognized. Wojtek's case, documented by multiple reliable witnesses in extraordinary circumstances, provides a compelling historical example that complements contemporary scientific understanding. While we should be cautious about projecting human motivations onto animal behavior, Wojtek's actions during the Battle of Monte Cassino stand as a remarkable instance of interspecies cooperation under the most extreme conditions imaginable. For the veterans who shared their rations, cigarettes, and beer with a bear who ultimately helped them survive one of history's bloodiest battles, there was never any doubt Wojtek was not just a mascot, but a true comrade in arms who had earned his place in their ranks. The aftermath of Monte Cassino brought both glory and melancholy for the Polish forces and their bear companion. As the dust settled on the battlefield, the 22nd Artillery Supply Company found themselves celebrated throughout the Allied forces. War correspondents flocked to interview the men and photograph their unique comrade, with stories of the soldier bear appearing in newspapers across Britain and America. For a brief moment, the Polish contribution to the Italian campaign received the recognition it deserved, with Wojtek serving as a charismatic ambassador for his adopted nation. The soldiers enjoyed showing off Wojtek's talents, his saluting, his beer drinking, his playful wrestling, to visiting officers and journalists. Yet beneath this celebration lay a growing awareness of Poland's precarious future. As the Red Army pushed westward through Eastern Europe, it became increasingly clear that the Poland these men were fighting for might not exist after the war. Even as Wojtek basked in his newfound fame, his human companions wrestled with the realization that their sacrifices might not secure their homeland's freedom. The final months of the European War saw the Polish II Corps continue its advance through Italy, with Wojtek accompanying the 22nd Company through each phase of the campaign. The Bear's presence provided continuity and comfort for men exhausted by years of combat and displacement. When the fighting in Italy ended with Germany's surrender in May 1945, the Polish soldiers faced an impossible choice: return to a homeland now under Soviet control, where many feared persecution for their service in the Western-aligned forces, or accept permanent exile. For most, including the men of the 22nd Company, the decision was painful but clear. They could not return to a Poland dominated by the same Soviet regime that had imprisoned them in the gulags. As the Polish II Corps was transported to Britain for eventual demobilization, Wojtek traveled with them, crossing the continent one final time to reach Scotland. The journey was bittersweet. While the Bear and his companions had survived the war, they were now heading not toward home but toward an uncertain future as refugees in a foreign land. The 2 years Wojtek spent with his unit in Scotland represented a strange limbo between war and civilian life. The Polish soldiers were housed in resettlement camps while British authorities determined their long-term status. Wojtek became something of a local celebrity, often brought to community events where he charmed Scottish villagers with his gentle demeanor and human-like behaviors. Children especially were drawn to him, and veterans recalled how patient he was with their attention, allowing them to pet his fur and feed him treats. These interactions provided rare moments of normality and joy for displaced soldiers struggling to envision their future. Yet as demobilization accelerated and the men began dispersing to take civilian jobs across Britain, Wojtek's situation became increasingly precarious. A 500-pound bear could not live in standard housing, nor could individual veterans, now focused on rebuilding their shattered lives, provide the care he required. The decision to transfer him to Edinburgh Zoo, while pragmatically necessary, represented a final heartbreaking separation for men who had already lost their homeland, their families, and in many cases, their health to the war. The scene at Edinburgh Zoo on November 15, 1947, when Wojtek was officially handed over to his new home, spoke volumes about the bond between the bear and his military family. Dozens of veterans, many in full uniform with medals displayed, gathered for the formal ceremony. As Wojtek entered his new enclosure, the soldiers stood at attention and saluted their comrade one final time. Several witnesses reported that Wojtek returned the salute, standing upright and raising his paw to his head in the gesture he had learned years before. Whether this was a trained response or coincidence, it provided a poignant conclusion to his military service. Many of the hardened combat veterans wept openly as they said their goodbyes. Stanisław Krzyżanowski, one of Wojtek's primary caretakers, later recalled, "It felt like we were abandoning a child. He had been with us through everything, the desert, the mountains, the battles. He was not a pet, he was one of us." The soldiers promised to visit regularly, and many kept that promise for the remainder of Wojtek's life, making pilgrimages to Edinburgh from across Britain to spend time with their old friend. For Polish veterans scattered across the world by war and politics, Wojtek's story became a powerful symbol of their collective experience. The extraordinary journey from Soviet imprisonment to battlefield glory to eventual exile. In Polish émigré communities from London to Chicago, tales of the soldier bear were passed down to children and grandchildren, preserving both the light-hearted anecdotes about his antics and the deeper significance of his role in their wartime brotherhood. Veterans associations kept his memory alive through newsletters, reunions, and commemorative events. Meanwhile, in Poland itself, where communist authorities suppressed the history of Anda's army, Wojtek's story survived only through whispered family stories and carefully preserved photographs hidden from official view. The iron divisions of the Cold War meant that for decades the full story of this remarkable bear and the men who loved him remained fragmented, celebrated openly in the West, but hidden behind the Iron Curtain, much like the veterans themselves, split between exile and silence. It would take the fall of communism and the reunification of Europe to finally piece together all aspects of this extraordinary tale and restore Wojtek to his rightful place in the shared heritage of Poland and her wartime allies. Today, more than 8 decades after a small bear cub was purchased with chocolate bars and a pocket knife in the mountains of Iran, Wojtek's legacy continues to evolve and expand. What began as a simple act of compassion by homesick soldiers has become an international phenomenon, with books, documentaries, memorials, and educational programs dedicated to preserving his remarkable story. In 2023, the animated short film A Bear Named Wojtek was nominated for an Academy Award, introducing the tale to millions of viewers worldwide. Each new generation discovers in Wojtek's journey elements that resonate with contemporary concerns: the plight of refugees, the psychological toll of war, the complex bond between humans and animals, and the power of compassion to flourish even in the darkest circumstances. Unlike many war stories that fade with the passing of those who experience them firsthand, Wojtek's tale has grown more powerful with time, transcending its specific historical context to become a universal narrative about resilience and connection across boundaries of species and nationality. As the last veterans who knew the real Wojtek have passed away, his story has transitioned from living memory to enduring legend, not diminished, but rather enhanced by this transformation. Perhaps the most significant aspect of Wojtek's legacy is educational. In classrooms across Poland, Britain, the United States, and beyond, teachers use his story to introduce young people to the complexities of World War II history. Through the accessible narrative of a bear who became a soldier, students engage with challenging topics like forced displacement, the multinational character of the Allied war effort, and the complicated aftermath of victory that left some nations behind the Iron Curtain. Educational programs based on Wojtek's story have proven particularly effective with students who might otherwise struggle to connect with distant historical events. The Wojtek Memorial Trust, established in 2009, has developed curriculum materials used in schools throughout Europe and North America, ensuring that younger generations understand not just the entertaining aspects of the bear's tale, but also the serious historical context in which it unfolded. Through Wojtek, students learn that history is not a remote collection of dates and facts, but a tapestry of human and occasionally animal experiences with continuing relevance to our world. For the Polish diaspora, Wojtek remains a potent symbol of national identity and resilience. The children and grandchildren of those who fought alongside the bear, or who, like him, could not return to their homeland after the war, have embraced his story as part of their cultural heritage. Polish community organizations worldwide host Wojtek-themed events, from academic symposia to family-friendly celebrations where children can learn about the bear who helped defeat the Nazis. In this way, a story that began in tragedy, with Poland's invasion and the dispersal of her people, has evolved into a unifying narrative that connects Polish communities across national boundaries. This phenomenon has accelerated since Poland regained full independence in 1989, as the formerly divided narratives of wartime experience, those preserved in exile and those permitted under communism, have merged into a more complete understanding of the nation's complex 20th century journey. Wojtek's story, once primarily celebrated among émigré communities, has been fully reintegrated into Poland's national consciousness, a process symbolized by the numerous monuments to him erected across the country in recent decades. The scientific community has also found value in studying Wojtek's case, particularly regarding animal cognition and the formation of cross-species bonds. Behavioral scientists note that Wojtek's actions, from his apparent mimicry of human behaviors to his remarkable battlefield service, provide historical documentation of capabilities that modern research is only beginning to fully understand. The fact that a wild animal could integrate so completely into a human social group, adopting their routines and even assisting in their activities, offers insights into the cognitive flexibility of bears and the environmental factors that shape animal behavior. Some researchers have compared Wojtek's case to modern examples of wildlife rehabilitation and integration, suggesting that his story, while extraordinary, illuminates natural capabilities rather than representing a complete anomaly. This scientific interest has added another dimension to Wojtek's legacy, ensuring that his remarkable life contributes not only to historical understanding, but also to our evolving comprehension of animal intelligence and human-animal relationships. As we reflect on the incredible journey of Corporal Wojtek, from orphaned cub to battlefield hero, to zoological attraction, to global icon, we are reminded of history's capacity to surprise and move us across the decades. The Polish soldiers who found a bear cub in the mountains of Iran could never have imagined that their compassionate act would resonate through the centuries, inspiring books, films, statues, and educational programs around the world. Yet in sharing their rations with a helpless animal amid their own desperate circumstances, they demonstrated a fundamental humanity that transcends the grim statistics and geopolitical analyses that typically dominate war narratives. Their bear companion, who carried ammunition through artillery fire at Monte Cassino and brought momentary joy to men facing unimaginable hardship, stands as a testament to the unexpected connections that can form even in history's darkest chapters. In Wojtek's story, we find not just an amusing historical curiosity, but a profound reminder of our capacity for kindness, our need for companionship, and our ability to form bonds that cross even the most fundamental divisions of species and circumstance. This, perhaps, is why the tale of the soldier bear continues to captivate audiences worldwide. Because in a bear who became a soldier, we recognize our own enduring search for connection amid chaos.